So now what we have is almost like a global movement across all of the tiles. Now remember that we do have 144 tiles because it's 12 times 12. Now the one thing that we can do is actually start to use some of these numbers just as we did in source and destination. We have an X and a Y number that we can use. Now what do we want to change on this kind of final thing? Like we don't really want to change how far these go. Like 50 seems a pretty good number, but we do want to add some independence to each one of these slides. So what we're going to do is add something into our sine wave. So we've got the frame count, which is adding the general movement, this kind of global movement in here. But what we want to start to add is independence for each X and Y tile. So where I've got this frame count times this number, this very small number, to add this kind of wave in place, what I'm also going to add in here, I'm going to add a plus. I'm going to add X in here. So remember that X is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 12. This is in the kind of across direction on the page. So by just adding this plus X, what we'll see is every single X tile, which is going down the page, has this kind of line effect. So just by adding this in very, very quickly, we've kind of got this motion in this X direction. So it's moving across the page, but at different speeds depending on this X direction too. Now, of course, I can slow this down and kind of make it not so separate. So I'm going to add some kind of times by maybe just half the speed of each X tile looking different. So just by doing that, kind of feels a little bit more fluid. The smaller we make that number, of course, the slower the kind of difference between them all. So 0.2 would make it a little bit closer to each other, as you can see there. So we can see that this is doing this kind of sampling effect. So each one of these tiles going down the page is working independently. So what we want to do is actually, maybe we do want to speed that up a little bit. Maybe it's 0.5. We don't want to do it just in the X direction. Each of these tiles is working independently. So we're also going to add in a Y direction. So we're going to add a plus Y in here. So let's see how this one looks. And we can see this is adding a lot more variance in here as well. So each one of these tiles is working very, very independently now. I might want to times this by a different number as well. So times by 0.3, let's put in there. So here we've got the global one. Here we've got the X direction, here we've got the Y direction. All of them are working independently. So what we should see now is something that looks a little bit more like this. Now I can change how this works in a lot of different ways. This is obviously just working in the Y direction. If I move this distortion from here, so I'm going to take it off and put it on here. We've got it in a completely different direction because it's now sampling in a different way. I could even do it on any of these things. So maybe change this width. So now we have something that looks kind of more tiled and stretched in here, maybe in the height as well. I can add it into multiple things as well. So I can add just distortion in lots of different directions. And there we have it. So we have something that looks really pretty cool very, very quickly. And this is kind of how kinetic type works. We're taking a sample of the grid of the thing that we've actually started with, and then we're just moving the source based on the direction of the destination. So by just adding some little bit of math and a little bit of these kind of tweaks in here, I can add some kinetic type really, really quickly. So this is the kind of basis for pretty much every kinetic type style project. This is how we have these kind of like grids set up in this kind of way. So what we'll talk about in the next project is extending this even further. We'll talk about the next project before we have a little bit of homework.